year ago, America fell in love with a singing janitor from Terre Haute.
Oh, Richard Goodall won, you might remember, America's Got Talent.
A middle school janitor.
Hallway in Terre Haute, Indiana, and nobody thought twice about it. He was just the janitor, the guy who waved at kids between classes, hummed classic rock while wiping down cafeteria tables, and locked up the building after everyone else went home. Then one grainy phone video changed everything, and America fell in love with a man it didn't even know it was watching. But here's the part most people missed while they were busy cheering for the fairy tale. Underneath that humble, easygoing exterior was a man who had survived heartbreak most of us would struggle to imagine, and who spent years quietly wondering if he'd ever get a real shot at the life he wanted. Now, at 56, Richard Goodall has finally said the quiet part out loud, and it confirms something a lot of us suspected the whole time we watched him sing. A life built on routine, not recognition. Richard Goodall didn't grow up dreaming of stadium lights or record deals. He grew up in Indiana, close to where he still lives today, and he built his entire adult life around steadiness. Show up, do the work, take care of the people around you. That was the whole philosophy. For more than 2 decades, that meant custodial work for the Vigo County School Corporation, most recently at West Vigo Middle School, where he became something closer to a fixture than an employee. Teachers relied on him. Kids adored him. He was the guy who remembered names, who noticed when someone was having a bad day, who made an ordinary Tuesday feel a little warmer just by being present. Singing was never a career plan. It was a release. He grew up around music, sang in choirs and gospel groups, did karaoke with friends on weekends, and belted out classic rock anthems while he worked because it made the job feel lighter. People who knew him back then have said the same thing for years. His voice always sounded like it belonged somewhere bigger than a school cafeteria. But Richard never chased that. He wasn't hunting for a stage. He was just a guy who liked to sing while he swept. The video nobody asked permission for. In 2022, that habit collided with a smartphone. A student filmed Richard performing Journey's Don't Stop Believin' during a school event and posted it online without telling him. He didn't orchestrate a moment. He didn't know a camera was rolling. By the next morning, the clip was already spreading, and within days it had been picked up by national outlets. Comment sections filled up with strangers who had never met him but suddenly felt like they knew him. Even television personality Howie Mandel took notice publicly, saying a voice like that deserved a much bigger platform. And through all of it, Richard kept showing up to work in the same uniform. He didn't quit. He didn't pivot his whole identity around viral fame. He kept mopping floors, completely unaware of how far that one unplanned clip would eventually carry him. What a lot of people don't realize is that this wasn't his first attempt at being seen. Years earlier, Richard had auditioned for The Voice, hoping for any kind of opening. Nothing came of it. No callback, no explanation, just silence. He didn't complain about it publicly. He went back to his routine and treated the rejection as one more part of chasing something that rarely rewards people on the first try. The first flight of his life. 2 years after that cafeteria video went viral, producers from America's Got Talent finally reached out. In May 2024, Richard boarded an airplane for the very first time in his life, at 55 years old, to fly to Los Angeles and audition in front of judges and cameras on a scale he'd never experienced. Up to that point, he had never traveled west of the Missouri River. The entire trip must have felt like stepping into another world entirely. His nerves were visible the moment he walked onto that stage. But the second the music started, something in him settled. His performance of Don't Stop Believin' moved the room so completely that Judge Heidi Klum hit the golden buzzer, sending him straight to the live shows without another audition required. Simon Cowell later called it one of the most memorable auditions in the show's history, and he wasn't exaggerating for effect. There was something about watching a man who had spent decades unseen finally get seen that hit differently than a typical talent show moment. From there, Richard treated every performance less like a competition and more like a gift he'd been handed. He dedicated How Am I Supposed to Live Without You to the woman who would become his wife, tore into Eye of the Tiger with raw, unfiltered energy, and closed the season with Faithfully, a performance that left very few dry eyes in the building. When the season ended, Richard Goodall was named the winner of Season 19, becoming the oldest champion in the show's history and the first singer to take the title in 5 years. It looked, from the outside, like a perfect storybook ending. But the real story was heavier than anything that made it to air. What the cameras didn't show. Long before America ever heard his voice, Richard had already lived through a string of quiet losses that shaped every note he'd eventually sing on that stage. After the rejection from The Voice, he found some comfort performing with a small gospel band, a routine that gave him purpose outside of work and mopping floors. Then the pandemic hit, venues shut down, gatherings stopped, and that band simply fell apart, taking away one of the few places where his music had ever felt fully understood. For 23 years, Richard Goodall pushed a mop bucket down the same. Then came the loss that changed everything. In 2021, Richard's first wife, Patricia Sue, passed away from kidney cancer. She had stood by him through years of disappointment and quiet doubt, and her death left him unmoored in a way that ordinary grief doesn't fully capture. The daily rhythms they'd built together vanished overnight. The home they shared suddenly felt too quiet. Richard kept showing up to work every morning because that discipline was simply who he was, even while he was privately learning how to navigate a life he barely recognized anymore. Those closest to him have said you could hear the weight of that loss in his voice whenever he sang afterward. That sorrow never fully disappeared. It became part of the emotional depth that later moved millions of viewers who had no idea what was underneath it. Even after everything he'd lost, life eventually handed him something unexpected. In 2022, he met a woman named Angie, long before any cameras or television contracts were part of the picture. She knew him simply as Richard, not as a viral clip, not as a future contestant, just a man who liked to sing while he worked. Over time, she became the steady presence he leaned on through the entire whirlwind of his AGT run, encouraging him through moments of doubt and reminding him he deserved real happiness rather than a few fleeting weeks of attention. Just days before the season finale, on September 18, 2024, the two quietly got married in Pasadena, California. They kept it intimate, family and a handful of people from his AGT circle, followed by a dinner on the beach in Malibu, before the chaos of finale week swallowed them both back up. It wasn't staged for a camera crew. It was a decision made for entirely personal reasons, and Richard later credited Angie directly during his winning moment as one of the biggest reasons he found the courage to keep pushing through every round of the competition. A discovery he never expected to make. Angie didn't just support Richard emotionally. She encouraged him to finally look into a question he'd carried quietly since childhood, the identity of his biological father, a mystery that had followed him since he was adopted as an infant. Using an ancestry service, the two of them eventually tracked down a man named Hubert, a retired K-9 police officer and Army veteran living not far away in Indiana. Remarkably, Hubert had no idea Richard existed at all until they connected. Their reunion also revealed something else entirely unexpected. 3 siblings Richard had never known about. According to Richard, his biological father actually recognized him first, having seen his face on television during his America's Got Talent season and suspecting a connection before anyone confirmed it. When the two men finally spoke, Hubert reportedly asked if Richard were that janitor guy from the singing competition, still stunned that after all those years of not knowing he had a child, that child turned out to be someone he'd already seen on national television. Richard shared the news publicly, introducing his biological father to fans and thanking Angie directly for encouraging him to search in the first place. He said plainly that without her push, he probably never would have gone looking at all, content to leave that part of his history unanswered forever. For years, he had made peace with not knowing. Meeting Hubert didn't erase that earlier chapter of quiet acceptance, but it gave him something he'd stopped expecting to find, a living connection to the other half of his own story. Why he kept mopping floors. Once the cameras stopped rolling, plenty of people assumed Richard would walk away from his custodial job for good. That assumption turned out to be wrong for a lot longer than most expected. He went right back to work at West Vigo Middle School, cleaning classrooms and waxing floors the same way he always had. When asked why, his answer was simple. He genuinely loved the students, the staff, and the structure that job had given his life for more than 2 decades. As he put it in interviews after the win, the school saw him every single day. To them, he was still just Richard, show or no show. His hometown showed up for him in a big way, too. He received a key to the city of Teote, and the school held an emotional pep rally in his honor, filled with cheering students and teachers thanking him for representing their community with so much humility. And long before any of that recognition arrived, that same community had already proven its loyalty. When the show first required him to fly out to Los Angeles, it wasn't a network or a sponsor who covered the cost. It was friends, neighbors, and strangers who'd seen his viral video, pulling their own money together through local fundraisers just to get him there. New opportunities kept stacking up alongside his day job. He sang the national anthem at an Indiana Pacers game, opened a show for Howie Mandel, and performed at local holiday events like the Circle of Lights, all while still clocking in most mornings. Co-workers and students eventually stopped treating him any differently, which Richard has described as a relief rather than a letdown. Seeing him in the hallway every day made his newfound fame feel like a normal part of who he'd always been, not some separate identity he had to perform. Rather than rushing into a record deal, Richard approached his music career carefully, wanting to grow at a pace that felt honest rather than rushed. On August 29, 2025, he released his debut single, Long Time Coming, recorded in Nashville. He described feeling like the luckiest man alive and thanked fans for their patience while the goodbye nobody saw coming. For nearly 2 years after his win, Richard balanced two completely different lives. He figured out what direction his music would take. He also joined a local group called Sugar Street, performing smaller shows that let him experiment without the pressure of a national spotlight, a way of staying connected to the version of himself that existed long before any of this attention did. In August 2025, he returned to the America's Got Talent stage for the show's 20th anniversary special, opening the night with Eye of the Tiger. He later performed Long Time Coming alongside Journey guitarist Neil Schon during the season 20 finale, a full-circle moment tied directly back to the song that had started his entire journey. Watching his original audition clip again backstage that night reportedly hit him harder than he expected, a reminder of just how much had changed since that very first performance. One behind a mop, one behind a microphone. That balance has now officially shifted. At the end of the 2025 to 2026 school year, after 3 years of service, Richard officially retired from his custodial position with the Vigo County School Corporation. In his own words, the end of this school year just seemed to make more sense than not. He described the decision as emotional rather than easy, admitting that walking those familiar hallways for the final time hit him harder than he anticipated. The quiet early mornings before students arrived had always felt peaceful to him, but once the hallways filled with kids for his last days on the job, the reality of leaving finally caught up with him. Colleagues who worked alongside him for years described the send-off as bittersweet, carrying the same warmth that had followed him since that very first viral video. For a building full of students and staff who had watched his entire journey unfold in real time, saying goodbye to their janitor felt like closing a chapter they'd all quietly been part of together. And alongside that retirement came a headline nobody predicted 2 years ago. Richard signed a deal with production companies Everard Entertainment and Mad Chance to bring his life story to the big screen, with writer Chris Parizo attached to develop the script. Producer Ben Everard called Richard's journey from sweeping hallways to national television the epitome of the American dream, while producer Andrew Laza pointed to Richard's story as proof that it's never too late to chase something you actually want. When asked how he felt about the whole thing, Richard kept it grounded, as he always does. "Who makes this stuff up? I'm just a regular guy." What he finally admitted. So here's the part that brings us back to the title of this video. The thing a lot of viewers suspected the whole time they watched him sing his heart out on that stage. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a secret persona. What Richard has finally admitted, in his own words and through his own choices, is something simpler and honestly more powerful. That the humble, unbothered guy we watched on television wasn't a character built for the cameras. He was the real thing the entire time. The grief, the rejection, the years of being overlooked, none of that got erased by a golden buzzer or $1 million prize. He carried all of it quietly, kept working the same job, kept showing up for the same kids, and only stepped fully into his new life when it finally felt right, not when the spotlight told him to. He's admitted, more than once, that walking away from the school was genuinely scary, that entertainment is far less stable than a steady paycheck, and that choosing to leave behind 23 years of routine took more courage than anything he did on a talent show stage. He's admitted that without Angie's encouragement, he might never have gone looking for his biological father, and that the discovery of Hubert and 3 siblings gave him a sense of belonging he'd quietly stopped expecting to ever feel. And he's admitted, in the most understated way possible, that he never once walked onto that AGT stage assuming he'd win. He just hoped people would understand how much singing actually meant to him. That's the confirmation a lot of fans were waiting for, whether they realized it or not. Richard Goodall wasn't